Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. In the last video, I showed how the question vault works in Certifyr and how the smart AI import helps bring these questions into the platform really quickly. So for this one, I wanted to show what happens next. Because once the questions are in the vault, this is where things start to get a lot more useful. So the whole point isn't just to store the questions nicely, it's to actually build from them. And this is the part I always wanted to feel simpler. So a lot of the time when teams had the content, turning that content into real assessment still felt way more manual than it should have been. You'd have the questions in one place, you'd have an assessment tool somewhere else, and someone still had to piece the whole thing together. So the idea here is pretty simple. Once the questions are already sitting in the question vault, building an assessment should feel like part of the same workflow, not like a separate job. So let me show you what that looks like. So here, I'm inside the assessment builder in Certifyr, and you can see the flow across the top bar. Details, rules, questions, settings, candidates, preview, and finally save. That's basically the full process of building an assessment from start to finish on the Certifyr platform. And I like this because it makes the workflow feel clear. You're just moving through it step by step. So first up here is the details. This is where I give the assessment its basic identity. Things like the title, the description, and the main information that tells me what this assessment actually is. This might sound simple, but it does matter. Because once you've got lots of assessments in the system, you want them named properly and set up clearly from the very start. Otherwise, things get messy pretty quickly. So this is really the foundation. What is this assessment? Who's it for? What's it meant to do? That kind of thing. And this is also where assessment templates come into it. So if you've already built an assessment layout you like, you can save that structure as a template to make the future assessment execution a lot faster. And I'll show you what I mean. So we might name this Semester 1 Maths Exam 20 multiple choice questions. There we go. That's all ready to go. I don't currently have any blueprints saved, so we'll leave that until the very end. So you do need to have at least one assessment already created before you can save a template. And I'll touch on that again when we get to the end of the flow. Then we move on to rules. So if I press the next step, and this part is really about setting clear rules and expectations around the assessment itself. So this is where the owner can define the conditions that the candidates need to understand and agree to before they complete the assessment. That's especially useful in more formal exam situations where you want those expectations clearly set up from the start rather than left vague or assumed. So it's just about how the assessment works technically. It's also about creating a clear framework around how the candidate is expected to approach the assessment. And I think that matters because an assessment isn't just a list of questions. It's also the structure and expectations around how someone interacts with it. So this step is really about defining that properly before you even get to the question selection. And we can also modify that. So if you don't want a set of rules on the page that the candidate needs to agree to because it's an informal assessment, you can turn that off by pressing the toggle here. But for this particular assessment, we are going to have these assessment rules in place, and you'll notice that it gives you a set of default rules. So those default rules are to review each question carefully, do not use outside materials or assistance, stay on the assessment page until you submit, answers are final once submitted, and contact support if you need experience technical issues. So you can opt to set your own set of standard rules, and you can save those rules as a template down the bottom here as well. Okay, so I may just want to put that no cheating allowed during assessment, and then we can save that as a template. So I go here, we go no cheating is my rules, and we save that template. If I go to this drop down now, no cheating becomes an option in that drop down. Here we go, and we've saved our rules for this particular assessment. Now the big one, let's move along to the questions. This is where the question vault starts to become really, really useful that we talked about in the previous videos. Because now I can pull these questions straight in from the vault instead of rebuilding everything from scratch. And that's the whole point. The questions are already in the system, already structured, already usable. So now building the assessment becomes much, much lighter. And there's a few different ways to do that. So if I want to, I can just pick the questions manually, as you can see here. click 1, click 2. So if I already know exactly what I want in the assessment, I can browse the vault, choose the questions myself, and build it that way. But if I want to speed up things a bit more, I can also tell Certifyr to pull together a specific number of the least used questions. And I really like that, just because avoid using the same content over and over again when you're trying to build something fresh. So instead of manually hunting for underused questions, I can say how many I want and let the platform do that part for me. So what I can do is go back to the top here. We can select the least used. So for this particular assessment, let's do 20 questions. I'm going to apply my selection. There we go. And it's already picked 20 questions that are directly from my question vault. Beautiful, ready to go. And then there's also one more option, which is auto-selecting an even spread across all categories. So that's really useful when you want a more balanced assessment without manually piecing that balancing together yourself. So instead of thinking, all right, I need this many questions from one category, this many from another, I can let the platform evenly distribute the questions across the categories for me. So that saves time, but it also helps with the assessment structure, keeping it more balanced from the start. And I think that flexibility really does matter a lot, because sometimes you just want total control, and sometimes you need speed, and sometimes you want a quick way to build something balanced without overthinking it too much. So whether I'm selecting questions manually, pulling in a set number of least used questions, or auto-selecting an even amount across all categories, the important part is that it's all flowing from the same question vault. That's what makes this feel connected. I'm not going back to old files, I'm not copying and pasting from documents, and I'm not rebuilding the question formatting as I go. I'm just building from content that's already there and already ready to use. And I think this is where you really feel the difference between having a real question system and just having piles of files everywhere. When the question foundation is solid, the assessment creation gets way easier. So just to give you an example of this weighted category situation, if I click on the weighted category here, it's going to give me the categories that I have available in my question bank. So as you'll see here, I've got 101 finance questions and I've only got one maths question. But we could essentially say, look, I just want one from each of these. And underneath, it's going to automatically pick that one question for me from each of the categories. If you're not happy with that particular question, you can click on it and replace it. There we go. And it's replaced the finance one that I had. So no need to overthink your question selection. It gives you a few different options. Do you want quality? Do you want speed? Or do you want both? So let's move on to the next step. Then from here, you've got your settings. And this is where you start shaping how the assessment actually behaves once someone's sitting it. So up the top, you've got the scoring and certification side of things. You can set the minimum score needed to pass. You can choose whether a certificate gets issued automatically on pass. And if you want to, you can also set an expiry date for that certificate. I really like that this is built straight into the assessment setup because it keeps certification connected to the assessment itself instead of feeling like some separate job later on. Then below that, you've got the actual test behavior settings. So things like whether candidates are allowed to go back to previous questions, whether the questions get shuffled, and whether the answer options get shuffled too. That gives you a bit of control over how the assessment runs, depending on what kind of experience you want. Then further down, you've got the reporting. So here, you can choose what kind of report the candidate gets back. If I go further down, whether it's a summary or it's something detailed. And if you don't want that report available straight away, you can delay the release and set the report release date as well. So you may have a group of students who are completing an exam and you don't want them to get the exam results back until 2 weeks later and they all need to receive it at the same time. You can select that date, select that time, and it will be made available to those students on their candidate dashboard on the date that you've selected. So for me, this section is really about tightening everything up. By this point, you've already got the assessment structure sorted and the questions are in place. Now you're shaping how it behaves, how it's scored, how certification works, and what the reporting looks like afterwards. So what makes it feel like a properly configured assessment rather than just a list of questions. Okay, so next, after that, we've got the candidate section. Go to our next step. And this is another important part because obviously an assessment doesn't just exist on its own. At some point, it needs to be connected to real people. So this is where you decide who the assessment is actually for, who's going to receive it, who it's going out to. And that's a good example of why I wanted a certifier to feel more than just a question bank or just a builder, because the workflow keeps moving. You're not just creating content in isolation, you're moving all the way through toward delivery. So as you can see here, I've only got 2 people in the system here for testing purposes, but if I want to, I can pick this individual, Mr. Burgers. I can press next step on him, and he's going to be sent an email and a notification to say that he's been enrolled in this exam. Then from here, you've got the preview. And I think this is an important step, because before you save and finalize everything, you want to be able to look over it and make sure that it all feels right and looks right. You want to make sure that the assessment flows properly, and you want to make sure the content looks the way you expect. Make sure nothing feels off. It's basically that final check before you lock it in. And I always think that makes the workflow feel a lot safer and a lot more complete. So you'll see here on the screen that we have the name of our exam, how many questions are in that exam, what our settings were that we chose. So our time limit here is 30 minutes. We have a passing score of 80%, and the candidates only get 1 attempt. You can see what this particular question will look like in the live panel for the candidates taking the assessment. And you can also see the access and rules that we implemented earlier. So no cheating allowed during assessment, and the configuration snapshot. So do they get a certificate issued on pass? Are they allowed to move back and forward between questions? And what's the reporting? Are they going to receive a summary or a detailed analysis at the end of this? So once you're happy with how that's going to be set up, we can then move on finally to save. So on the save page here, at this point, the assessment's been built properly. You've set the details, you've defined the rules, pulled in the questions, worked through the settings, and you've chosen the candidates. So now you've previewed the whole thing, and now you're ready to save it and publish it. But there's also a bit more going on here than just hitting save or publish. At this point, the assessment can also be reviewed by the Smart Assessment Reviewer. And that's here to help things like readiness, fairness, and even question distribution before locking it in. I think that's really useful because sometimes you want that extra layer of confidence before an assessment goes live. And this is also where the assessment layer can be saved as a template. So if the Save Assessment Layout option is selected, that blueprint gets saved back to the details page for the next time you come in and build an assessment. So that means if you've created a structure you like, you don't need to rebuild that whole setup from scratch every time. You can use it as a starting point next time, which makes future assessment execution even faster than what it is already. So that ties back to what I mentioned earlier in details. You do need to have at least one assessment already made before the template can be saved. But once you've got that in place, it becomes a really useful way to speed things up. And I know that sounds obvious, but I actually think this full flow is a big part of what makes the builder feel good. Because it's not chaotic, it's not scattered, it's very structured. You just move from one stage to the next. And because the questions are already coming from the vault, the whole thing feels much lighter than the old way of doing it. So if I click here, I can say, check my assessment. We've only got a couple of questions, so it probably won't come out with too much. And it's saying here that we're ready to publish. No materials were at risk and everything's looking good. So this is not going to stop you, even if it does find some categories with more questions than others. This assessment readiness feature is not going to stop you from publishing. It's only going to point out those features prior to publishing. So if you're still happy with how the exam has come out in the assessment builder, you can publish it anyway. You don't need to return to editing. It's not going to stop you doing anything at all. It's merely just an extra set of eyes on the assessment that you've created. So if I publish anyway, and I think really that's the bigger point of this whole video, is that once the question vault is in place, building an assessment should stop feeling like a manual chore. It should feel like a connected workflow, and that's what I wanted here. Not just a place to store the questions and not just a place to create assessments, but a clear path from one to the other. Because when the content foundation is already sorted, everything else is easier. Building gets easier. Consistency gets easier, reusing content gets easier, and honestly, even just mentally, it feels better. I'm the kind of guy that gets quite cluttered in the head, and it's nice that I can just focus step by step and ensure that once I've completed each step, there's a clear path forward for implementing the assessment. So you can see here, we're back at the active assessments page, and we've created our semester 1 maths exam. So we're going to have a breakdown here of our duration is 30 minutes. We have one candidate. No one has currently completed the exam. But if we open up the card and expand it, we get a whole bunch more details to look at. So here we get the completion progress, how many of our candidates have completed it. So we get a nice visual cue. You get the average score of those who have completed it currently, the number of candidates in the candidate pool, and the number of questions that are available in the assessment. And underneath that, we have our enrolled candidates. And from here, you'll be able to see who started the exam, who's completed it, and also bring up their detailed summaries and their certificates upon completion. So really clean way to then monitor exams once you've implemented them and candidates have started sitting it. So yeah, that's what I wanted to show in this one. Just how questions flow from the vault into a real assessment and how the builder itself works from start to finish. For me, this is where Certifyr starts feeling like a proper platform instead of just a place to store content. Because once the question foundation is right, the rest of the workflow can actually build on top of it properly. But in the next video, I'll probably keep following that path and show what happens once the assessment goes out. Either how marking fits into the workflow or how the records and certifications stay connected afterwards. We'll take a look at the candidate dashboard and what the other side, the candidates can see when they start sitting these assessments. If that sounds useful, then stick around. In the meantime, sign up for Certifyr at certifyr.io. You do get the benefit of a free account, a very generous free account. And if you find that it is a useful platform for your current education needs, then consider upgrading to the Pro tier. But guys, thanks for your time, and I'll see you next time.